Welcome to Shovel Talk, a podcast for economic developers. From your friends at the Golden Shovel Agency.
Hello, Darren Varley back for another episode of Shovel Talk. We got a really interesting one going on this time. We got Lindsay Rubeniuk, the founder of 100th Meridian Immigration. She is going to be chatting with Bethany Quinn coming up very soon. But I do want to alert you to some Golden Shovel updates. Most of you who have our Gatekeeper service, I'm sure, are aware of our Q2 focus on incorporating tourism into an economic development strategy. But if you haven't checked out any of our content, please head over to our resource learning center on the Golden Shovel website and check out our podcast. We interviewed the tourism/chamber director up in Devil's Lake, North Dakota, which is a fishing hotbed. So we chatted with her. We also have a downloadable white paper as well as a previous webinar that you can listen to the recording. So tourism was the focus. So if you haven't had a chance to check out any of that content, again, the resource learning center on the Golden Shovel website. Also, something coming up that sounds really interesting to me is a webinar on July 24th, the economic development benefits of community EV charging. Again, July 24th. Again, head over to the Resource Learning Center and register today. Their space is limited for that webinar. Internal Golden Shovel news. We are very happy to bring on Hannah Fortin as a new gatekeeper representative. Our client base keeps growing, so we need more gatekeepers. So Hannah has been meeting her clients and becoming a great member of the Golden Shovel gatekeeper team. All right, let's get to Bethany. Lindsay Rubeniuk is up, founder again of 100th Meridian Immigration. Bethany, take the floor.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I am excited to be joined today by Lindsay Rubeniuk with 100th Meridian Immigration. I am really looking forward to this conversation because we have not had a conversation to really talk about workforce and the role that immigration can play into it. So Lindsay has a really unique perspective that she brings to economic development. And I think we're all going to learn a lot and get inspired today. So Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me on the podcast. It sure is a great podcast in terms of economic development, and I've learned a lot by listening to the show.
That's great. I'm so glad that you listen, right? That you're a listener as well as a guest. That's fantastic.
You betcha.
Here.
Yeah.
So, hey, before we dive into learning more about you and your company and your experiences, why don't you let everyone know where you are and a little bit about your organization?
Okay, so I am located in Granby, Manitoba. So Manitoba is our province. And if you look on the map of Canada, we are your central province, right? And we're at the start of the prairies, depending how you look at it. So my population size of my town is approximately 700 people in town and 700 people out of town. So that's how small and rural our community is where I'm based out of. And 100th Meridian Immigration is to take that to, I think, overly used term, boutique agency that specializes in economic development, and it's through workforce development, but we focus on doing that through immigration as well as apprenticeships. So we kind of have two different twists to our organization, and that's what we majorly focus on is attracting people to our area, and as well as assisting them with immigration and just getting them familiar and hoping that they stay within our prairie communities.
That's great. And I'm so glad that you were able to kind of situate where you are in the terms of our listeners. That will resonate with many Golden Shovel clients who in rural America, it's the same thing, right? We're constantly pointing people on a map to this is where we're actually located, depending on your community. And getting people to fill open jobs is a huge challenge when no one has heard of where you live. So I think, you having lived that experience, then also helping other communities is really valuable. So I think really that's the first thing we should talk about today is why do we need to bring immigrants to rural communities? Why is that important?
Well, I think it's tremendously important to think about it through an economic development point of view, and it could be looked at through two lenses, right? So first of all, how does it help the community, right? So that's usually when people talk about immigration or any kind of economic development. It's more focused on how is it going to help the community? Why is it important? At the same time, too, though, I think it's really important to also say how is it going to help the newcomer or the immigrant as well. So we can take it from two point of views. And the first one is your community development. Right. So we look at it as in terms of increasing our population size. And then when we increase our population size, we have more selection of skilled workers, or even not even maybe a selection, but we actually get the skilled workers that we need in the communities in order to keep our businesses open, as well as these newcomers and immigrants. They also tend to buy businesses or start businesses. So that's another thing that rural communities need. It doesn't matter if you're in Canada or the United States, wherever you are, we need these people to come in. And then what I've also been finding is that there is a huge influx of immigrants into city centers, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason why they actually do that is because they don't know. They just don't know where we are. And so it's important for them to know where we are, because it really helps them establish themselves. If they're able to connect to our communities, what it allows them to do is say, okay, I can get a good job. I can, purchase a home. I can get established here, right? Where oftentimes, and what we're seeing lately, especially in our Canadian cities, is that we have newcomers and immigrants arriving and they just can't get established. They just can't get those good jobs they need. So I think it's important for us as rural communities to also attract these immigrants, to give them a good life, and as well as to help us become more viable, now and in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on 2 points that are so interesting, and one of which being that when immigrants actually are able to come to smaller communities, a lot of times it is easier to settle and to build a life. But how do you actually reach those people so they're aware, when people in Canada might not even be aware of where you are, right? People in the US
sure.
are not necessarily aware of many of the rural communities that we work with.
Yeah. So we do the way how I tend to reach people is through, social platforms like LinkedIn, right? To do constant awareness of rural Canada. And specifically, I focus on what we call the prairies, which is Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And those are our three provinces, which we term the prairies. And so I do a lot of writing on social media, as well as I do my own podcast, Life on the Prairies. And so I think a lot of people learn from my podcast the opportunities and the lifestyles that you can have when you relocate or immigrate to a rural area. So those are kind of the ways how I do it. And I know that communities, they often try to do that as well, and saying, hey, like they put up ads or whatever it may be, that all opportunities here. But the one thing I have found throughout my practice is that it's word of mouth, right? So I found that we can put up all the advertisements we want and say, hey, move to Grandview, Manitoba, where we're always happy, or whatever the slogan may be. But it doesn't really, it's not effective. And what's more effective is actually if you have the first family move there and they have a really great experience, and then they tell the second family, and so on and so forth, right? So I found that word of mouth is a great way to attract and retain people to your community. If you get one or two families coming and you do a really great job at that, then you'll have more and more people coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have seen that at Golden Shovel, not necessarily on the immigration side, but even just with workforce, talent attraction overall, is when we share a success story, for example, of a local entrepreneur or a young professional building their career, and they promote that on social media, and their friends that they're connected with from when they went to college or lived in a larger area see it, then other people come. So definitely that word of mouth and social sharing has been really impactful.
So I'll tell you a story. And this is it's a true story, and it really plays into this, and it might be a little long, but I think a lot of communities can learn from this. So when the Ukraine war happened, right, when that all started happening a couple of years ago, the Canadian government, for the first time ever, gave what we call an open work permit to any Ukrainians that would like to come to Canada to temporarily live and work. And so at the beginning of this, we had a local business owner in Dauphin, Manitoba, which is 45 kilometers or 30 miles east of me. And he had said he owns this implement dealership, and he gave $25,000 in the community. He said, hey, I'm going to put $25,000 down if we can help a couple of families, one or two, come to the city of Dauphin. So what that started was something that would be, we would never know the end results until actually today, and it just keeps going and going. So he puts this $25,000 out of his own money, and he partners with a local nonprofit to administer the funds because he wanted to make sure it was, it was ran properly. And then slowly but surely, it wasn't even slowly, but a couple of weeks later, I ran into him and I said, hey, you know what, Don, I'll help you, whatever you need in this project, I'll help you. And since I have my immigration designation, I can actually help these people, with their immigration to Manitoba if they actually want to stay. And he said, sure. And in the end, what would happen is we would get within 2 months, we'd get together a team, and they were local business leaders. And there was him as the business leader. Then we had a spiritual advisor, Father Brent. We had a community volunteer, Pam Ubashenko. We had a fellow named Terry Stakilo, and he became the accountant for the committee. And we also had Jason Biette, who was our lawyer for the committee. So we had 7 people and that formed this committee and said, okay, so we're going to bring a couple of families to the city of Dauphin, and this is how we're going to do it. So what ended up happening was I had a friend who worked in Ukraine, and I used to work over there. So I got in contact with them and I said, hey, we're willing to, we're willing to host some families in our community, and we'd like to put this word out in Ukraine. So we got the word out through this local economic development agency that I worked with. And we had people, basically Zoomed people. We interviewed them by Zoom, and we kind of met them over, over Zoom. And we asked them, would you like to come to Canada? And they're like, yeah, definitely. We want to come to Canada. And the reason why we interviewed them was because we wanted to ensure that they had the skill set, that if they came to our community, they would actually find employment. And
Sure.
Being in a rural area, we have lots of trade opportunities, like for welders, for mechanics. We just recently got a 30-acre greenhouse that needs a lot of workers. And we also, again, we have a welder that needs a lot of welders as well. So, and we also have farmers who need a lot of agricultural farm hands and so on and so forth. So we interviewed these people, and we got probably, in the end, we said we couldn't turn some away. So we're like, okay, we'll help these first 6 families. And yeah, so we started with so we had said 2, and then we got it to 6, and they came over. And so we got them established, we got them jobs. And in the meantime, Pam, who was our settlement worker, quote unquote, because we're all volunteers, nobody's paying us to do this, right? So Pam goes and she starts to find homes for them. Because one of the things we were told at the start of this was, you'll never find enough housing for these people, because that just seems to be everywhere, right? Is that people say, oh, you'll never find enough housing. And but sure enough, Pam went and she found this, different types of housing and so on and so forth. And her motto was, if she wouldn't move her family in there, then she wouldn't, we would never put a family in there. So these 6 families come over, and they really had a great experience. And the business community donated more. The community was donating more. So we're getting all these donations in terms of monetary and material. And then at one point we got up to 15 families, and we're like, okay, this is great. 15 families within, and the city of Dauphin is only has 7,000 people, and we call it a city. I know that's funny to some people, but in the way how we're here in Canada, especially Manitoba, our population is pretty low. So we got these 15 families, and we're like, this is amazing. This is great. And within the last 2 years, we have ended up obtaining over 60 families to live and work in the city of Dauphin. And it's all through word of mouth.
Wow.
So that's going back to my point is that, and we still keep getting emails and calls from people from Ukraine, like from Ukraine and who are actually here in Canada who have heard about our community and our group, and they've been asking for assistance and what opportunities are in the community of Dauphin. And at this point, we kind of had to, since we're volunteers, we've had to, not quit, but we've had to like really let go because we're in strong for 2 years and it took up a lot of our time. So now what we do is when people call or email us, we say, yeah, there's jobs here. There is housing here. We can point you in the right direction. It's just we can't do everything that we did for our original families for you, but definitely we're here to help and guide you. So I think just going back to the fact that rural communities who believe they need to have like an economic development officer to do all this. We didn't have an economic development. We did not have any paid staff, right?
Sure.
We just had a group of business people that believed in a humanitarian goal. And by default, and I actually seen it because I'm an economic developer by training, I actually seen the potential when we started this project, but I had no idea that we would get 60 families or over 200 people into the city of Dauphin within 2 years. So just a piece of advice to those who are looking at immigration and thinking they have to expend all these dollars on advertising and marketing, that I think if you just really focus down and try and get a couple families to your community, I think what will happen will be the same as what happened with us. And it doesn't matter, again, if you're in rural America or rural Canada, people are people. And if they're happy and they have a great life, they're going to tell their friends and family about it as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's fantastic. And what a great success story for you to be able to share. Over 200 people. That's huge for a rural community. So I do have to ask the obvious question, though. The housing challenge is real, right?
It is.
So when you talk about 60 families, 60 homes, did you actually have that much vacant property, or did you end up having to build homes as a result of this project?
So when we first started, as I mentioned earlier, is that we were told there was no housing really by some people that I think would have had a pulse on the housing in the city of Dauphin. But, so we're like, okay, well, maybe there isn't any housing. And it was just more word of mouth when we all started it. Like, so we didn't have to build anything. What it was more Pam going out, like our settlement worker. Again, that's what I call her. She just went out and she talked to different people and she met with different landlords. And they said, yeah, I actually do have something that we will be renting out. And so she built this database of people that are interested in renting out. And we actually end up getting calls from landlords. So we actually now have more availability than what we do for people that are currently coming in. So we have more housing than what people need at this point. And I think it was just rolling up your sleeves and really doing some digging and just getting into the community and not just doing a quick high level overview of just like listening to 5 people say, oh yeah, there's no housing, so just like don't do it. Right. It's more just talking, getting to know people. And then again, word of mouth. That's also what happened was they just landlords talked to landlords and they said, hey, this is a group looking for people, and landlords were looking to rent. And it was kind of like a matching service.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that we've recommended at Golden Shovel for quite a while is to complete a housing study. And obviously we assist our clients in their strategic work. And one of our recommendations is you have to engage the landlords, you have to engage the property owners, and you need to complete surveys, right? You need to conduct surveys to find out what's out there because not everything is listed. Not everything's going to be on Zillow or Redfin or what have you. And it sounds like that was your experience, that you, Pam, like you said, had to knock on those doors to create the database because it wasn't just readily available.
Yeah, no, correct. And we don't have a lot of people that come here don't really look at Zillow or, those because they're more urban oriented. So it's more like Facebook Marketplace right? That we looked on and just, yeah, word of mouth. So I think being a rural community, we actually do have strong advantages. It's more you just have to be willing to, you know, after your workday is done as a volunteer, just stay up at night and do those phone calls or do those emails and just get her done. And then you'll have a resource and an inventory that's second to none. And we are able to do it.
No, I love that. And, one of the things I wanted us to discuss today is the barriers that an immigrant family faces if they are interested in coming. We discussed housing. Was there anything else that came up in your conversations with folks?
So I think it's, as economic developers, it's the same thing everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're a newcomer, if you've lived in, the States or Canada all your life. It's you got to have housing and you got to have employment and you have to have a social life, right? So if we're missing any one of those things, people are not going to be in your community for a long time. So for barriers in terms of immigration, I often find that once you can identify housing and once that person knows that they can get a job, and also, as I think the barrier would be then going into the social aspect, right? Like getting them out into the community. And we often assume lots of times that, oh, if we give them a pamphlet or say, go online, you can get all the information here, that that's what the person will do, right? So I think a barrier would be for newcomers, immigrants to your community would be not being it wouldn't be for them. Like they're just shy, right? And they just don't have the network to go out and show up at a hockey game, right? So I'll use hockey because that's what we're known for here, right? So, or, to show up at a baseball game and, or go to tryouts at the volleyball, like, at the school for volleyball, right? So there's all these things in terms of recreation that they might not show up for because they just, they don't have the network. So what I always say to communities is that you do have to have that one or two people, like the welcome wagon that we had way back when. I'm not sure if everybody else has had it in their towns, but we used to have this thing called the welcome wagon. And people, it wouldn't matter if you were an immigrant or if you just moved from the city into our town, people would actually show up at your door and they would present you with a brochure and they'd introduce themselves and it would be a group of people. And I said, that's what we got to get back to, right? Like we just can't leave it to our web pages. Like, sure, they're nice and they're pretty and they have lots of great information. And that's a great resource for a newcomer to have at their fingertips when they're looking for things. But you also got to have that human connection. So I think what a barrier would be for a newcomer immigrant to the community is not having that connection beyond their employment. So having a group of people that are willing to go out and meet them and take them to, to the local game or to say, hey, this is a club. Do you want to be a part of it? Right. And just like showing them around and showing them where everything is. And I think that's also a really great advantage for rural towns is that it doesn't take long to show people what you have. Like I'll give you a great example. My daughter just graduated this weekend. And as I mentioned, my friends who are Ukrainian, they had immigrated here like 6 years ago to Manitoba. They have come to see me a number of times, but they never ever got to see our town. Like we've never really taken them around. So my friend said to me yesterday morning, she's like, yeah, I'll go for a walk with you. And I took her all around town and I showed her our baseball diamond. I showed her our curling rink, our swimming pool, our school. And she said, Lindsay, she goes, I would retire here because they're already established in the city of Winnipeg, which is our capital for the province of Manitoba. But she was so impressed with what we had. And she even said, she's lived here now going on 8 years. Like in Manitoba, she said, I had no idea that your town had all this. She goes, like, it's amazing what your small town has. And I looked right back and I said, I can take you to 20 more towns in Manitoba that has exactly what we do. And she was just blown away by it. Right. So just by me taking her around and showing her things, I think I really sold her on Grandview, like where I live.
Sure.
So just a great example.
Yeah, so it sounds like it could be just as simple as making sure there's a point person to do that, when someone immigrates to a community, whether they're from a different country, quite frankly, or maybe 100 miles away. I mean, if they're new to the area, having somebody dedicated to be the welcome wagon might help with that
Yeah.
transition.
Yeah. And even a couple of people, right? So, right. So that's what, like, if you have just a handful of people that are willing to just say, hey, yeah, I'll do that tonight, or I'll go meet them. And that's also what we did in the Ukraine project, the Parkland Ukraine Family Fund, was we actually went and picked them up from the airport, or we met them when they got off the train, right? So they didn't feel like they were alone. And like, so I think they were really impressed with that as well. So being able to meet people, and again, coming from a rural community, you kind of know when they're coming in, you kind of know when they're moving in. So it's not going to be a big surprise. So you can
Right.
do that. It's very manageable.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. A little harder in a big city. There, no one knows who's moving in or out.
Definitely.
Okay. No, that's great. That's a really good piece of advice. And as you mentioned, that can be managed by volunteers. You don't have to hire a staff member to be the welcome wagon. You
No.
just get some
Yeah,
people who love the community and want to share what they love with newcomers.
exactly.
So one of the questions that I have for you is, you gave that great story actually, as far as how a community did come together and successfully implement a recruitment campaign. This was obviously a unique situation, right? The war in Ukraine, thankfully, is not something that occurs regularly, but you've been doing this work for a long time. So what are your recommendations to communities who want to have immigration as part of their workforce attraction strategy ongoing, regardless of those types of circumstances? What
So I
should
think
they?
if you look at communities who have done successful campaigns in terms of immigration, is they've had great jobs available, and they have shown the people who arrive at their community that there's potential to have that job as well as many other jobs, right? So when a newcomer comes in, they are just like any one of us. We started a job and we look for potential, and we look for potential to move up. We look for potential for our significant others. We look for potential for our kids. And those communities that have been able to demonstrate that you're coming here and you're coming here for a job, but here are all the different things that you can do. Here's how you can move up. Here's how, your spouse, your significant other can become employed, right? Here's what your kids can do. So those communities who have done that, I think, have a stronghold. And again, when somebody has that success and that experience, then more people tend to move to that community because they know that there's a chance to have that same opportunity that their friend or family member did. And I've seen that time and time again. If you look at a place like Winkler, Manitoba, has been doing immigration as their economic development tool for I don't, somebody could probably correct me from Winkler area if they're listening. It's probably like 25 years for as long as I've been doing economic development. I believe that Winkler has been doing immigration, and they've done a great job of it. Nipawin, Manitoba, they're another great case study. They had an industry come in and they didn't have enough workers to fill that. So they did a strategic initiative and they brought over workers and so they filled up their spots. And the craziest thing about Nipawin is you look at it 10 years ago and it was just like any normal rural, or 15 years ago, I should say, like any rural community in Canada. And now you look at it and they're building a hospital. They built a new fire department. They have to expand their schools. Like it is, the neatest thing to watch, right? So you can do it. And those who have good jobs and those communities who have the housing are probably the ones that will fare the best in the long run.
Sure, absolutely. I know that some of our clients have shared stories about not just immigration helping with expansion, but sustaining. You mentioned sustaining earlier with population decline to moving away from rural communities, keeping the schools full, for example, can be critically important so they don't have to shut down. So whether your goals are to expand your community or simply to replace your population, this can definitely be a good strategy.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think it definitely can be. And those communities, the one thing I do want to touch on is in terms of immigration, there's a difference between immigration and settlement, and the roles between communities and the players within those communities have to be well defined. And oftentimes communities may not know their roles. So we're talking about municipal government, state, provincial government, and the employers. So if you truly look at immigration, it's employers that bring the immigrants in, really, because like if you're looking at economic immigration, so there's family immigration, there's all these other types of things, but my firm, we specialize in economic immigration, right? So if you look at that and you look at that's specifically what communities are truly looking for, it's the employers that it comes down to at the end of the day who will actually do the immigration, because you have to have the employer that will, we don't use the word sponsor, but they will nominate that person, right? Or they will state that, hey, we really want to hire this person in the long term, so we want to retain them. And then the community's role is more of the settlement, right? So what we talked about earlier is the welcoming, language classes, introducing them to different people, getting them familiar with the community, right? So those are the things I think that in terms of being sustainable and growing your community through immigration, that you really have to be sure that there's two ways of looking at it. And that's what you have to do is like to be sustainable, to grow your community, you have to really make sure that the employers are on board as well as your government's on board, because you can have one group that's on board and wants to do it. But if you don't have the other partner in play, then it becomes very lopsided, and that newcomer or immigrant will not feel welcome. So in any type of economic development, if you don't have a job for the person to come to and it's not supported by the employers, then you really don't have immigration coming to your community. But at the same time, even if you have that and you don't have municipal support or you don't have community buy-in, so you don't have those settlement services available to people, it's going to actually be hard to retain them. So we're talking about like sustainability. So those, I think, are the two factors when it comes down to immigration.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that could be one of the issues, right? Is sometimes you're able to get people interested in the jobs, but if there's no support to welcome them in, they might not stay.
Yes.
So your point about partnerships is definitely well made. So I'm curious, with your company, like you said, you focus on the economic side of immigration. How do you work with communities? How can you help someone who wants to start this type of a program?
So again, I like to tell people my stories, and the way how I got into immigration was when I was in economic development. I started looking at the different types of strategies that could really work in a rural area. So I started like looking at immigration because I worked for a community futures organization years ago, and I had learned that settlement. I had learned lots about settlement offices and what they could do. So I thought, okay, well, how do you actually get people here? How do you actually like do this? And I started studying immigration, and not really studying it, but it was when I started to read about it, I realized it was lots about law and policy.
Sure.
And it's not something as an economic developer that you could really dive into, like, because it's law and policy. You can help facilitate it, but technically you shouldn't be the one that's writing the, applying for the work permit for the employer, right, or doing the permanent, what we call permanent residency application, right? So I was like, wow, this is a lot. And it was a lot more complex than what I thought it would be as an economic development officer, right? So I went in and I went ahead and I studied for like a year, and I became a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. And with that, I learned lots about obviously immigration law and its policy. And the goal was to not only just help people. So what I learned was when I had studied it was that economic development officers can't know all of this, right? Sure. And I think it's an unfair ask of municipal officials and government to be asking our economic development people to do this and to know everything about it, right? Because they already have to do settlement. So my goal of all this was to actually work. What I do is I go in and I work with economic development officers as well as their communities and their employers, and I teach them the different things about what they should each be doing, right? So I'm more of a resource and education and training provider. So I don't technically like go in and write things for the employers unless they specifically ask me on the side, right? But what I do is I go and I say, okay, so communities, this is what you want to do. Here's the role of your community. Here's the role of the employers. Here should be the role of your economic development officer, and kind of, get them to understand that, and then, understand the long-term immigration strategies, because there's not just one way of doing it. And I've been finding lately that, and by no fault of the economic development officer, is that in certain regions they get sold on there's only one way to bring in a person, right?
Sure.
So that's what they do because it's easy, and that's all you know. If you aren't in the field of immigration, you wouldn't know that there are 60 other ways to bring someone in. So I go in and I work with the economic development officer to say, yeah, this can be your main strategy in immigration, but truly there are other ways. If your employer needs this person and they need them a lot quicker than what this strategy is doing, here's some other ways we can look at it, right? So that's kind of that's the role that 100th Meridian plays in terms of community economic development.
No, that's great. So I think really it comes down to, again, this is an area most economic developers are unfamiliar with.
Mm-hmm.
They want to incorporate this into a workforce attraction strategy, but don't know how. And you're a great resource to start those conversations, is really what it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say that is this, don't try and know it all yourself, because it is a lot, and it doesn't matter like where you are. We have laws, like there's immigration law all over, and it doesn't matter if you are in rural America or rural Canada, you're going to have to face that. So really get someone that understands that and understand the difference between immigration and settlement, because they are two totally different things. And right. I just love to help rural communities and economic development officers just try and achieve workforce development.
That's great. And I love that you were able to share a success story with us that is so incredibly powerful and demonstrates what can be achieved when people really decide to focus on this type of initiative. So I really thank you for joining us today. We have reached a point in our podcast where I'm no longer asking you important questions, and we're moving to our game. And you said you listened, so you are familiar, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our shovel toss game is going to see how fast you can answer 10 random questions which you have not received in advance.
Okay. Let's see if I can do this. Okay.
Okay.
What was your last one? Okay.
So I'm going to put my stopwatch on right here. Let's see how fast you can go. All right. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. First car.
My first car?
Yep. Your first car. These are
Saturn.
random questions.
Okay. Saturn.
Favorite dessert.
Strawberry shortcake.
If you could be a superhero, who would you be?
Bionic Woman. Lindsay Wagner.
Nice. Favorite vacation destination.
Oaxaca, Mexico.
Book you're reading right now.
Oh, I have 3. I'm rereading The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs.
Top of your bucket list.
Top of my bucket list?
Mm-hmm.
I have too many. To do a world tour by train in as many countries as I possibly could.
That would be cool. Go-to song.
Can't Stop Laughing by the Trews.
Something you can't live without.
My kids.
What you wish you would have known when you started your career.
It takes a lot of time, but in the end, it's all worth it.
And what do you want to be remembered for?
My positivity and that I genuinely believed in rural development and how great our communities really are.
You made it. You got through them. Good job. So you got 1:40. So not our fastest, but definitely pretty fast. That was a good clip.
I know. Sorry.
I think your favorite superhero has your name, Lindsay.
I was named after her.
Oh, there you go.
So yeah, there you go. Now you know my age if you look it up. Yeah, sorry, no, I was caught off guard that, yeah. I was like, I should have been ready for these. And then I'm just like, oh, yeah, sorry.
It's harder than it seems, isn't it?
Isn't it? When I listen to other people, I'm like, well, yeah, that's what it'd be. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I've said like 4 different answers when you talked about the like your bucket list. I'm like, I've had like different answers like all the time.
Sure. Well, what we want to do changes, so that's good.
I know.
More things.
So, okay,
well,
awesome.
Thank you so much for participating with us today. We really appreciate it. Wish you well. And why don't you just throw out the URL for your website if anyone wants to learn more?
Yeah, so it's just 100 Meridian, so 100 MERIDIAN.ca. So 100meridian.ca. If you want to remember me, if you want to, I named my company after the Tragically Hip song, The 100th Meridian. So if you guys want to look up that song, and it talks about the city of Brandon, and I love to develop anything west of the 100th Meridian. So that's how I got my name too for my show, or for my business.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'll have to look it up after this. Well,
okay, great.
Have a wonderful
day. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Bethany and Lindsay. To learn more about Lindsay and 100th Meridian Immigration, please check them out at their website, 100meridianimmigration.ca. And then you can also check them out on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Before we sign off, Golden Shovel social accounts. Let's not forget about that. Facebook, like us at Shovel Toss. Twitter, follow us, or X, I should say. Follow us at Gold Shovel. LinkedIn, follow us, Golden Shovel. YouTube, please subscribe to our channel, Golden Shovel Agency. And we also are on TikTok now, Golden Shovel Agency. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Shovel Talk.